Good morning, all of you. Today we shall discuss briefly about the sports physiology. Now we know that the sports or any physical activity which is done on a regular basis plays an important role in the development of not only the muscle but improving the general health of the body. Even if in these times of pandemic, if you would have gone through the literature or the guidelines issued by various scientific bodies like your ICMR or any other scientific organization, they say that on to the recovery, the best possible way is doing physical activity. Once you do a limited amount of physical activity on a time to time basis, that is on a regular basis, it helps in developing the immune system of the body, and the immune response of the body to the attacks by foreign organisms is different than those people who do not indulge in any physical or sports activity. So now let us very briefly see what are the various changes that are happening in the body when once we do a regular physical exercise. Now to understand this, you have to recollect some of your initial physiological chapters on the muscle, where we had said that the skeletal muscle fibers are present, they have the actin and the myosin cross bridges. For any muscle contraction to take place, there has to be an interaction between the actin and the myosin filaments. We also said that there are two types of exercises there are two types of muscle contractions where we see either a isotonic muscle contraction or a isometric muscle contraction. Isotonic is something where the tension remains the same, the muscle length changes. Isometric is something where the muscle length remains the same and the tension changes. So these are two types of contractions where we find that either it is a isotonic or a isometric. But when you do a regular physical exercise, you will find that there is both of the muscles involved, but to what extent is the maximum contraction taking place depends upon the type of exercise you are doing. So for example, when you are lifting up of any weight, it may be a isotonic exercise where you try to lift a heavy weight, the muscle is shortening because it has to lift a load, and once that shortening is reached and you are able to lift that load and sustain that load at that particular height, then it becomes a isometric contraction. So basically it involves both the type of contraction, but the type of exercise you do depends which type of contraction is predominating the other. To begin with, when you lift your heavy weights or you do some gym, lifting up of loads and other things, the contraction and expansion may involve more of the change in the muscle length, the tension remaining the same. But when you try to lift the weight for a few seconds above the ground level, then it means that you are able to lift the weight, but you are having to sustain it against the gravity. So at that time, the muscle length remains the same, the tension changes. So it depends upon what type of exercise you do, whether it's more predominant of a isotonic or a isometric, but essentially it is a mixture of both the types of contractions involved. Then we also knew that there are two types of muscle fibers, where they are the red muscle fibers and the white muscle fibers, also called as the type 1A fibers and the type 2 fibers. So what do you mean by type 1A fibers or type 2 fibers, or what do you mean by red muscle fibers and the white muscle fibers? Now, as the name itself will give a little hint of what we are going through, a red muscle fiber means that it is red in content, having the increased myoglobin, that is increased muscle proteins are there. It is red in color because it is having increased capillary supply, blood supply is more, and it has got more amount of oxygen supply. So for such muscles to contract, we will require more oxygen consumption is needed. Whereas on the other hand, if you see the white muscle fibers are not white, they are comparatively little paler in structure, and because they are pale, it means that they are having little comparatively less myoglobin there, and there is a little less vascular supply. So these muscles will contract only in the presence of less amount of oxygen, or anaerobically they can contract. So now where are these two fibers used? So wherever there is a need for the muscles to contract in a very fast manner for a short duration of time, it will be the white muscle fibers, like the muscle fibers of the fingers where you are playing a musical instrument, or you are working on a keyboard where you are doing a fast typing, or when you are writing you require these muscle fibers to be very fast for a short duration period. So it is predominantly the white muscle fibers because they do not require that much of oxygen for a short physical bout of activity. Whereas when you are doing some other exercises, like you are doing running, cycling, or a brisk walking at the time, you will require a little more of the red muscle fibers, because it's not a sudden burst of activity. You are going on a long walk, you are going a brisk walking, or you are doing jogging for a few kilometers in time. So that will require more amount of the red muscle fibers to be inactive. So basically, this is a red muscle fiber and a white muscle fiber distribution which determines the speed and the sustenance of the activity. The other is the type of exercise you do: mild exercise, and moderate exercise, and severe exercise. So these are the other three classes where you have been graded: mild, moderate, and severe exercise. Now ultimately, what is the purpose of doing all these exercises? Now when we are involving ourselves in these exercises, basically it means that it increases the muscle strength, it increases the power, and thirdly it increases the endurance capacity of the muscle. So what is strength? Strength is the strength of a muscle is the load against which the muscle can contract. So that is defined as the strength, and this muscle strength depends upon the muscle mass which is present or proportional to the cross-sectional area. That means what? The greater is the muscle mass in the body, greater will be the muscle strength. It also follows the principle of use and disuse atrophy. You use an exercise, you use your muscle regularly, you do some activity for a period of time, you will find that the bulk of the muscle increases, the cross-sectional area of the muscle mass increases. Once the cross-sectional area of the muscle mass increases, it means that the muscle strength is increasing. After doing some exercises for a couple of days, you just stop doing exercises, you will find that your leg, that is the thigh and the leg muscle, size of the legs, that is the thighs and the lower legs, or the or your arm or forearm. Initially, when you do regular exercise for a few weeks, you will find that the muscle mass has increased, they are a little more bulky. You stop them for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, again they will get atrophied, the size will decrease. So in other words, with regular exercises, you are putting the muscle mass under stress, and when you are putting the muscle mass under stress, it increases the proportion, it increases the surface area, the muscle surface area is increased. That means the cross-sectional area is increased. Now, what are the other factors which help in increasing the cross-sectional area? Basically, in a normal individual, testosterone is responsible for increasing the cross-sectional area, and under the influence of testosterone, you will find that the muscle mass increases by about 40%. This is one of the reasons where in young adolescents, from adolescents to young adults, when they grow, under the influence of testosterone, you will find that the bulk of the muscle is increasing. In old age, once you are around 50, crossing 45, 50, and as age advances, you will find that the testosterone levels are coming down. When the testosterone levels are coming down, the atrophy of the muscle starts. I mean, the cross-sectional area of the muscles comes down. So basically, under the influence of testosterone, it is 40%. Estrogens have not that much of an effect. Hence, it is seen that the male muscle mass is more than the females under the influence of testosterone. There are other hormones also which contribute to increase in the cross-sectional area, basically the muscle mass. One is the thyroid and the other is the insulin, which provides adequate nutrition. So compare a normal individual with uncontrolled diabetes, you will find his hands and legs are comparatively very thin than in proportion to the body. So this muscle wasting is happening in uncontrolled diabetes, indicating that high blood glucose is detrimental to the muscle mass being developed, or it proportionately decreases the muscle strength. So basically here, one of the factors which increases the muscle strength is the testosterone. Abnormal endocrine disorders like diabetes or hypothyroidism can decrease the muscle strength by decreasing the muscle cross-sectional area. Start doing regular exercises. When you do exercises, the proportional cross-sectional area increases. Then next, once we have discussed about the muscle, the other function of the muscle is to generate a power. Now, what do you mean by power? The power of the muscle is the amount of strength it can generate to move an object in terms of weight and in terms of time duration. So the amount of weight which you are able to lift per minute is defined as the muscle power. Initially, the muscle power may be very high. You may have a very high ability to develop a huge load of weight, but that happens only for a few minutes. But in the subsequent minutes and in the next few hours, you will find that the power decreases. So, in other words, power is a test of the strength where the ability of the muscle to move a load in a unit time is described as a power. So the power of a muscle which decreases with time of work as the duration of the work goes on increases. You will find that the ability of the muscle to generate power or to move an object decreases. In the first 8 to 10 seconds, the maximum ability in a well-trained exercise or an athlete would be around 7,000 kgs per minute. In the next minute, it comes down to around 4,000, and in the next 1 hour, if the person continues to do some exercises, this will be coming down to 1700 per minute, 1700 kgs per minute. But remember this is the time or the statistics which is given with persons who are indulging or who are regularly exercising. In persons who are having a sedentary life or who do not do any exercises, these parameters will be further reduced. Now the third function of the muscle is endurance. What do you mean by endurance? Endurance is the ability of the muscle to carry on the same task for a long period of time. So ultimately, whenever you are doing a regular exercise, it not only increases the muscle strength but increases the power also. But the real test of the ability comes in endurance. So the endurance means doing a particular activity for a long period of time. So with exercise, the muscle endurance increases. It means you are now able to do the same work for a longer period of time. Say for example, initially if you are able to lift a load and walk for around 100 meters, after doing regular exercises, which will not only increase your muscle strength, that is the muscle mass will increase, the strength will increase, the power of the muscle will increase, but the ability to sustain that increase for a long period of time is endurance. And the ultimate aim of all these exercises is to increase your endurance capacity of the muscle. That is why it is said that in a graded exercises, one should do an exercise whenever you are going for a gym or you are doing some exercises at home. It should not be a local graded exercise, because when you do only a local graded exercises, the endurance capacity of a set group of muscles is only increased, not adhering to the whole body muscle mass. Say for example, if you are doing regularly exercises where you are only lifting the dumbbells or you are doing just lifting up of the heavy weights without any exercise for the lower limb, it will increase the endurance of the muscle power only of the upper limb, leaving the lower limb changed. Or if you are doing only some exercises by which is you are moving only the lower limb muscles or exercising the lower limb muscles, then the upper limb exercises will not have any training sessions. So it is generally advisable that even if you are doing a graded exercises where for a few minutes you are doing some exercises for the upper limb or you are doing it for the lower limb, that will help in increasing the endurance. But in general, it has been seen that if you can do some exercises simultaneously where it is involving the upper limb and the lower limb, there you will find that the endurance capacity is increased. The results on the overall body functions is much better when you do a general exercises involving all the muscles at a time rather than a graded exercise. For example, I'll give you cycling, running, swimming are considered as much more developing of much more endurances rather than just doing graded exercises in the gym where you just do little heavy weights, lifting up of heavy weights or doing some exercises or pushing the weights with the legs. So basically, how does this endurance develop and what is the function? Now the endurance mainly is dependent upon the diet, first of all. Secondly, to sustain a muscle activity for a long period of time, it is mostly the contents of the glycogen contents which are present in the muscle in the liver, which helps in performance of a muscle activity for a long period of time. So there you can see the chart. In a high carbohydrate diet, the endurance is somewhere around 240 minutes with glycogen content of 40 grams per kg. Whereas if you see, you take a mixed diet, the endurance capability comes only to around, improves to around 120 minutes. And if you are on a pure high fat diet, the endurance is only for 85 minutes. So endurance mainly depends on the diet, and it is a function of the glycogen stores which are in the muscle and in the liver. So this is the diagram which is showing the diet here. It's a high carbohydrate diet, it's a green one is a mixed diet, and it is a high fat diet. See the exercise here, 10 seconds, 40 seconds, it is in minutes and it is on hours. It is the percentage of carbohydrate diet and the percentage of fat uses. Here you will see those who are on a high fat diet will get exhausted early, where those who are on a high carbohydrate diet can sustain exercise for a little longer period of time. So this is where the endurance comes into the picture. The ability of the muscle to do a work or sustain a power for a long period of time is endurance, and that happens with a high carbohydrate diet. Now the next question is, once you are doing muscle exercise, whether you are doing a isotonic or a isometric, whether you are doing graded exercises or a general whole body exercises, it requires energy. And when this requires energy, it means that the energy for the muscle contraction comes from the breakdown of ATP. ATP is broken down into ADP, AMP, and that releases energy. So what are the sources of the energy which is present in the body? Now basically the energy here which comes from muscle contraction are by means of three different sources. Biochemistry would have taught you in these details. I am just going through the skeletal structure of this, where phosphocreatinine is broken down into creatinine and phosphate, a high energy bond is created. In the second stage, you find that this phosphocreatinine can sustain the energy for a few seconds or a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. Then subsequently, it is the glycogen, where the glycogen is broken down into lactic acid and that releases energy. Then it is the free fatty acids which are being used up. And ultimately, lastly, when these two stores are exhausted, it is the glucose and the fatty acid and the amino acids where we require oxygen, we combine with oxygen to form carbon dioxide, water, and ultimately energy is released. So basically the step 1, phosphocreatinine and glycogen are the energy storehouses which are useful and supply energy for a short duration of time, but it has to be in the, it does not require oxygen. Whereas when the duration of the exercise is prolonged, then you will require oxygen, and then you will find that the carbohydrates, proteins, and the fats are broken down to sustain energy. So what is the muscle metabolic system utilizing? When you see the muscle metabolic system which is being utilized, you will find that the phosphate is required or is sufficient to supply energy for around 8 to 10 seconds of maximum work. When it is supplied with the presence of oxygen, it can be increased to 4 times. Glycolysis can also be anaerobic. It is strongly inhibited by low pH. It forms lactic acid and it can supply 2.5 times the ATP per minute as an aerobic structure. Now, aerobic exercise or metabolism can last indefinitely. So, for a sustained and for a fast duration of action, for a long duration of muscle activity, it has to be the oxygen supply which has to be there for giving the energy for a long period of time, and that oxygen, where when it is supplied, also results in a certain gap or a deficit of oxygen, and that is called as an oxygen debt. So that recovery, once the exercise is over, it happens something like that, where like lactic acid is replaced, glucose is replaced, glycogen is replaced, and ultimately at the end the oxygen debt which has been produced, because for a short duration there was an anaerobic contractions taking place, and that oxygen debt has to be replaced, and it happens during the recovery period. The reverting back to the exercise or getting back the power and the endurance after a bout of physical activity will require 48 hours. So restoration depends upon the carbohydrate in the diet. You increase the carbohydrate content in the diet, you will replenish the stores of glycogen in a faster way, and less the carbohydrate and more others, then it will require a complete restoration for about 48 hours to get back to your endurance and power after a brief period of activity. That is why we find that in athletics, minimum 24 hours of gap is given between two bouts or 2 rounds of activity, so that there can be a complete recovery happening. Now, the restoration of the glycogen basically is dependent upon the diet. So ultimately it is the diet which plays an important role, and there you can see how much time it takes. If it is only fat and a protein diet, after a muscle glycogen has been used for 2 hours of exercise, you will find that it takes around 5 days to completely restore the muscle glycogen level and the power and the endurance. Whereas if there is no food taken, it takes only a few hours of recovery with general food, and if it is a high carbohydrate diet, it is in 40 or 50 hours the recovery or replacement can take place. Now this is what I had told you earlier: fast twitch and a slow twitch fast. The fast twitch are 2 times more the diameter. It has got more the content of the phosphogen system of the body, and the glycolytic rate conversion in fast twitch fibers is a little higher, but the mitochondria are a little less in fast twitch fibers, whereas in a slow twitch fibers you will find that there is more of mitochondria, high rate of oxidative metabolism, there is more myoglobins and more capillaries. So this is basically the red fibers, this is the white fibers, where the white fibers are having energy levels to provide for a very short period of time, whereas the slow fibers or the red fibers, they will have a sustained ability to provide muscle contraction and energy. Hence you will find more myoglobin, more capillaries and more mitochondria. Now the other thing is that what is the effect of the exercise on your respiration? So basically it is the oxygen consumption which is required, and we say that V oxygen content, or the volume of the oxygen which is extracted per ml of oxygen extracted per minute. So normally if you see that 250 ml of oxygen is extracted per minute at rest, or is the requirement of the body. You see for that the cardiac output is around 5 liters per minute, the cardiac heart rate is around 60 times per minute, the amount of oxygen carried, you calculate the amount of oxygen which is carried by every 1 liter of blood, or 1 gram of hemoglobin carries 16 milligrams of, contains around 16 grams of hemoglobin. 1 gram of hemoglobin carries 1.34 ml of oxygen. Multiply that with the cardiac output and the heart rate, you will find that at the end you will see that after 1 minute of a normal thing, 250 ml of oxygen is consumption at a normal basal metabolic rate. Whereas when a person starts doing exercises for a sudden bout of exercise and is untrained, the oxygen consumption increases to around 3600 ml per minute. That is the extraction. Whereas in a trained person, he does an exercise, the extraction is somewhere around 4000 ml per minute. In a marathon runner, it is around 5.1 liters is the oxygen consumption. or the extraction which will be provided. Now, how do you increase this from 250 to 3600 or 250 to 4000, or in a long exercises where there is a lot of endurance is there, 5000, 5.1 liters per minute. There, the V oxygen maximum occurs by increasing the pulmonary ventilation. So when you find that these people are doing exercises, the pulmonary ventilation increases by 60 to 70%, whereas the training will increase the V oxygen max by only 10%. So this is the thing, the ventilation and the oxygen consumption. See the total ventilation there, it is gradually increasing. This is the graph. Here 1 liter, 2 liter, 3 liters. In severe exercises, you will find that what is the total ventilation which is increasing there. Now the muscle blood flow, when we find when we are doing exercises at rest, it is about the muscle blood flow is around 3 to 6 ml of blood flow per 100 grams of muscle mass per minute. So this is the rate of the muscle flow through the muscular capillaries when you are not doing work. Say let's around 5 ml per 100 grams of muscle mass per minute. Whereas when you are doing a maximum amount of work, there the blood supply in the capillaries increases to around 90 ml per 100 grams per minute. Now how does this happen? This increased blood flow happens by two things. One, because of the exercise there is a release of certain vasodilator substances, and these vasodilator substances will cause local vasodilatation only in the exercising muscles, so the capillary blood flow is increasing. Secondly, because of certain exercises there is a slight increase in the venous return, there is a slight increase in the sympathetic neurotransmitters release, and this increases the BP. So increasing the BP will increase the blood flow, will supply the pressure there, whereas vasodilatation will allow more blood flow to go through the muscular capillaries. The cardiac output, when we see the cardiac output changes, the resting cardiac output is around 5 liters per minute. In an untrained, maximum cardiac output increases to 23 liters per minute, whereas who is a trained marathon runner, it is increased to around 30 liters per minute. Basically, the cardiac output is increasing because of there is an increase in the venous return, there is increase in the force of contraction, and the blood volume is slightly increased. So here you will find that increase in the heart rate and the stroke volume with increasing cardiac output. See this, the heart rate is increasing as the heart rate, this is the stroke volume, this is the heart rate. At 70 per minute you will find that at this particular heart rate it is around 3 to 5 liters per minute. When the heart rate is gradually increasing, you will find that the cardiac output is increasing. But the stroke volume can increase to a certain extent beyond which it is not possible. So basically it is an increase in the heart rate which is causing an increase in the cardiac output. But with trained athletes you will see that there is a bradycardia. The advantage is that after certain training, this much of increase in heart rate is not needed to increase the cardiac output. Because of exercise, the force of contraction is increasing. When the force of contraction is increasing, there is an increase in the stroke volume. So what I mean to say here is, in an untrained person, the increased cardiac output happens because of a sudden drastic increase in the heart rate, and also to an extent because of the increase in the stroke volume. But when you do a regular training exercises, the heart rate, literally in athletes is a bradycardia, so much of increase in the heart rate doesn't happen, but the stroke volume is increased, the cardiac output is increased because the myocardial contractility is increased, the force of contraction is increased. So with each pumping of the heart, there is more amount of blood which is pumped out in a trained athlete than in comparison with an untrained athlete. So also you will find that whenever there is an exercise being done, there is an increase in the oxygen consumption, there is also an increase in the heat consumption. The heat consumption increases by around 20 times. The body temperature increases. If this heat does not come out of the body, is not dissipated out from the skin either through water of evaporation or through sweating, then it will increase the body temperature. If the body temperature increases, without a proportionate heat loss, and the temperature can rise to around 41-42 degrees centigrade, it will cause neurological damage and will result in convulsions. So it is very much essential that in summer regions where there is a very high environmental temperature, excess of outside exercise should not be done, because the heat loss mechanism is not much efficient in a high environmental temperatures compared with a low environmental temperatures. Now the other changes which happens is volume depletion takes place. There is a loss of volume, the venous return, because of a sudden bout of exercises. There will be loss of fluid in the body because of heating, because of the sweating. That has to be returned back to normal. And for a short period of time, whenever there is a volume depletion, you will find that the same amount of the RBCs are present in a less amount of blood. In a less amount of blood volume, so the blood viscosity increases, the venous return may also decrease. So immediately after a bout of exercises, you have to, the extracellular fluid or the water has to be replaced, and the volume depletion has to be corrected. Then there are two other things where there is loss of salt and electrolytes from the body, where there may be a potassium depletion and sodium depletion, but mostly it is a potassium depletion which is most important than the sodium depletion, because sodium body has got ways and means to retain the sodium depletion. So replacement of potassium is very much essential. You should have a potassium in the diet because the loss has to be corrected. The other aids which help in improving the exercise efficiency is either a oral glucose, then steroids also play a role in improving the performance during a athletic period or during a bout of exercise. Growth hormone, erythropoietin are the hormones which are normally present and help in developing the muscle strength, muscle power and the endurances. Erythropoietin helps by means of increasing the vascular supply, increasing the RBC counts. Other things are the amphetamines and the caffeines. You drink a coffee or a tea or you take a tablet of amphetamines, you will find that the muscle power is increasing, the ability to perform muscular activity increases because of its action through the central nervous system. Comparing the male and the female, this diagram will give how the maximal VO2 per kg per minute is here, and you will compare the same thing between the 13-year-old of male and a 13-year-old of female, and you will find the values here, how much amount of oxygen is needed and how much amount of exercise is done. So in males comparatively, you will find that the chart is little more superior than females because of the role of the hormone of the testosterone. The other thing which I wanted to tell you lastly is about aerobic training. Now what do we mean by aerobic training? Now aerobic training is a training exercise is a training session which is being done to increase the endurance capacity. And how do you increase this exercise capacity? The exercise capacity can be increased by doing regular exercises for a particular period of time on a daily basis. Where this aerobic training, you are not only doing a isotonic and isometric contraction, but also utilizing the oxygen, and the ability of the oxygen to provide nutrition to the exercise muscle is increased with sustained performance. So what is aerobic training? The training is nothing but to increase the muscular capability, to increase the power and strength. You know that any physical exercise is a very big stress in the body. Now, if you do or give this stress to the body for a small period of time on a regular basis for a long period of time, you will find that the muscle parameters are increasing. This is nothing but aerobic training, and the aerobic training is done by doing regular exercises like your swimming, like your brisk walking, running, jogging or cycling. So these are the exercises which are involved in a regular aerobic training. And what does this exercise do to the body? First of all, if you see the body structure, about, depending upon the build-up, 30 to 50% of the body mass is skeletal muscle. So when you do an aerobic training, you are increasing the muscle mass and you are increasing the muscle power. In addition to that, the ability of the body after aerobic training to convert the energy into mechanical work is much more better than in an untrained person. So what I mean here is, whenever we do exercise, there is some energy converted into a mechanical work. So this ability to do more work increases with regular training periods. Now, in aerobic training, what is happening? If you remember there in the earlier sessions in the muscle class, we had told you about the motor units, the recruitment of motor units. What does recruitment of motor units do? The recruitment of the motor unit means that with exercise, more and more number of motor units are getting recruited. What is a motor unit? Motor unit is each muscle, each nerve fiber supplying to the number of muscle fibers is a motor unit. 9 to 10 is the muscle supply of each motor unit. So when you do exercises, the amount of motor units getting recruited to do work increases, and that increases your mechanical efficiency to do work. So this is nothing but a regular exercise on a daily basis for a short period of time is aerobic training, and it is nothing but it means it is adaptation. So now what does this adaptation do? When you are doing certain adaptation exercises, with exercise the stress increases, and with stress the speed of activity should also increase. Say for example, if you are running for 1 kilometer on the first day, you may require around 15 minutes or 12 minutes to cover that 1 kilometer with a brisk walk. But with adaptation, that is with regular training, you are able to now cover that 1 kilometer of distance in say around 8 to 10 minutes. That means the efficiency of the exercise, efficiency of the muscle is increasing. It is happening because more and more your motor units are getting recruited. So the first point in when you do an adaptation is that there is a increase of the conversion of the physical activity into mechanical work by giving stress on the muscle. The second thing is that each bout of a muscle activity should be of a sufficient duration. Not that you run for 3 minutes and stop, and the next day 1 minute, and the third day another 10 minutes. No. If you are doing an adaptation exercise, this training period has to be for a particular distance, and it has to be for a particular duration. That means it has to be done on a regular basis. The last point, or the third point, is that there has to be a sufficient rest given between two training sessions in the same day. Say for example, initially if you are doing little walking exercises, then you are switching over to some other mode of exercise. You have to give some amount of rest between these two sessions of training so that there is a recovery of the muscle and the stress does not become too severe stress for the sympathetic activity to get generated or to get stimulated. So the last point here is, the fourth point here is that it should be given certain rest between your training sessions. Say for example, if you are doing a 2-hour exercise session every day, and in these 2 hours you are spreading out between your graded exercises and aerobic training, sufficient rest has to be given between each modality of exercise so that muscle recovery takes place. Now ultimately, what happens when you are doing these regular exercises? When you do these regular exercises, two things are happening. First, the delivery of the oxygen to the muscle is increasing. Secondly, with the increasing delivery of oxygen to the muscle, the extraction of the oxygen by the muscle also increases, which will not be there in an untrained person or a person who is not doing exercise. So how do you increase the oxygen delivery? Now the oxygen delivery can be increased by increasing the pulmonary ventilation by doing an exercise. To make you understand the simple point, take two people, one who is doing regular exercises and one the other person who is not doing exercises. You ask them to do a run or a jog of 2 kilometers. You will find that at the end of 2 kilometers, the pulmonary ventilation, that means the respiratory rate of an untrained person is increased much more than the respiratory rate of a trained person. No doubt in both the situations you will find that the respiratory rate is increased, but in an untrained person, the rate of respiration will be much more increased than in a trained person. So this means that what has adaptation done? adaptation has provided an increased oxygen delivery to the muscles with a not proportionate increase in the pulmonary ventilation. That means the trained person can extract more oxygen, can deliver more oxygen with a comparatively less increase in the respiratory rate than compared with a person who is untrained. Now the next question is, with the increased respiratory rate, you are able to take in more oxygen, the oxygen is being delivered. The ability of the muscle to extract the oxygen from that particular blood supply is also comparatively much more in a trained person than in the untrained person. Then the cardiac output is also increased. The other training exercises, the other adaptation happens is, apart from the increased oxygen delivery and the increased oxygen extraction by the muscle, you will find that there is an increase in the cardiac output. So both these things help, and ultimately there is an increased oxygen diffusion from the muscle, from the capillaries into the muscle, and muscle into the mitochondria. And when more amount of oxygen is delivered, more amount of oxidative stuffs can get oxidized, more amount of foodstuffs can get oxidized to provide energy. So this increases the metabolic activity and improves the general immune systems of the body. Whenever the body's muscle mass is getting increased oxygen, it is getting increased blood supply, increased nutrients are available, you will find that there is an altered immune response. To an extent, there is a cerebral circulation is also increased. You will find that the person is little much more alert, more attentive, with a more ability to do work on a day-to-day basis, one who is doing exercise, than compare with the person who is not doing exercise. So we end here with the advice to all of you that start doing little bit of physical activity. You are always now in the 4th month of the lockdown period. You are at home. Those who have not begun any training sessions, my personal advice here is start doing at least 30 to 40 minutes of regular exercise on a daily basis. Thank you, children. Have a good day.